Okay, we are ready to get started. So yesterday we learned Daf Samach, and Daf Samach tied up the loose ends about the case of Suffolk, where someone was a Nazir Vadai, a Suffolk Mitzora, and a Suffolk Tameh. So we learned earlier that he will need 4 taglachases. The first taglachas would be the first taglachas of the Mitzora that's getting healed, it's starting the entire process. 30 days later is the second taglachas for the second taglachas of the Mitzora, and he has to wait 30 days in between because just in case he's not a Mitzora, he has to wait a full 30 days before he's able to do any taglachas because he could be a Nazir Tahar. The third taglachas will be to deal with if he is a Nazir Tameh to reset his count, and the fourth taglachas will be completing his Nazir Setahira, which is a total of 120 days. That we learned a couple of days ago. And then yesterday we learned how the karbanos work out. So the Gemara went through a very simple sequence of events. At the first taglachas, there's 3 possibilities that happen. It's possible that he's a completely Tahar Nazir, and the taglachas here is for completing his Nazir successfully. Normally, when a Nazir completes his Nazir successfully, he brings 3 karbanos. He brings an oila, a chatas, and an asham. He brings an oila, an asham, and a shlomim. Normally, he brings those 3 karbanos, but I hope I'm saying that right. Here, he will only bring his oila. He only needs to bring 1 carbon in order to discharge his Nazirs and allow him to drink wine and to be Metamal Mesim. So I'll bring an oila and I'll bring it all tonight. If in fact I've just completed my Nazirs to Tahira, then this will be one of my karbanos, and I'll bring the rest at a later date. And if in fact I'm a Mitzora or I'm Tameh, then this oila should be in Yadav. The second possibility is that he became Tameh and he's now discharging his Tumah and starting his Nazirs over. For that he has to bring a chatos. Now, a chatos behema he cannot bring because it's a suffix. But a chatos ha'oif you're allowed to bring on a suffix. So that's what the chatos would be for. And then he would also bring the tutsi purim because it's possible that this is the first of the 2 taglachasin of the Mitzora, which have to be accompanied by 2 birds, 1 shechted, 1 allowed to go free. That's after 30 days. Then he waits another 30 days and he makes a second taglachas. So now what are the possibilities? This might be the second taglachas of Mitzora. If that's the case, he doesn't need to bring anything for the Mitzora because the birds that are brought for the Mitzora are only by the first taglachas. The other option is he might have completed his Naziris to Tahira. So for that, he brings his Oila on the Tanai again. And he might also be resetting his Naziris to Tumah, so he brings a Chatas Ha'oif. The third taglachas, once again, has the same suffix. So he brings again an oila and a chatas ha'oif. And by the fourth taglachas, the only thing it could possibly be at that time is the taglachas of a Nazir who successfully completed the term of Nazirs. So he brings an oila, and he says, if I already finished my Nazir Satira in one of the earlier taglachas, well then this will be an adava. And then the other 2 karbanos that he brings a bevadai. Then the Gemara wanted to know, actually, we have to go back a little bit because the next shaila from the Gemara, we didn't learn inside, the Gemara wants to know why you cannot double dip on taglachas. Why can't 1 taglachas work to solve 2 problems for 2 separate purposes? So allow me to go back to Daf Samach Amud Beis because that's where we left off really. So we're now on Samach Amud Beis. And we are just before the halfway mark. Sha'alu Talmidav es Rab Shimon ben Yochai. The Talmidim of Rab Shimon ben Yochai asked him the following question. Nazir Tahar u'Mitzora ma'u she'igaleach taglachas achas v'oilo loilu kana lukan. He has to accomplish the taglachas for completing a Torah Naziris, and he also has to complete the taglachas of Mitzvah. Can he have one taglachas and it will work for both? Let it kill two birds in one stone with one stone. Amar Lahen, Reb Shimon ben Yochai answered, Eino migalech. It does not work. And the reason why it doesn't work is because each of these two taglachas have different properties. And since they have different properties, the taglachas for one will not work for the other. And Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai explains, Ilu zel legadel v'zel legadel, if the purpose of both of these haircuts was to begin now growing the hair again, then it would work. Or if it was zel lahaber v'zel lahaber, both of these haircuts are a final haircut that's going to end the entire sequence, then Yafa Atem Omer, you'd have a good argument that the one taglacha should work to serve two purposes. But Akshav, Nazir lahavir, the Nazir who completed successfully his term of Naziris, his haircut is the end of the cycle. There's nothing else happening. But Umitzayra, the first of the two taglachasin that the Mitzayra gets is legadel. It's made so that now he can have fresh growth that he will cut next week. And therefore, it does not work. The taglachas of the first taglachas of the Mitzayra is not compatible with the final taglachas of the Nazir. In fact, the first taglachas of the Mitzayra will not work as the last taglachas of a Nazir Torah. But the talaloi limei sifra. What about the final taglachas of the Mitzayra? That's not legadel, that's lahavir. That's the end of the cycle. So that is similar in its properties to the final taglachas of the Nazir. So why not use one taglachas for the final taglachas of the Mitzayra and let it also function as the final taglachas of the Naziris? The Amar Lahen, Sir Reb Shimon ben Yochai responded, they're also non-compatible. Why? If both of these taglachas occur before the zrikas damim of their respective karbanos, yafa atem, you'd have a good argument. Ella mitzayra lefnei zrikas damim. The mitzayra shaves his hair the day before the karbanos, so it's before the zrikas damim. The nazir lachar zrikas damim. The nazir first brings the carbon, then he shaves his head, and then he puts the hair underneath the pot that's cooking the shlomim. So therefore, any of the taglachasin of the tzaras will not be compatible with the taglachas of the tahira, the final taglachas of the naziris. But maybe let's look at another option. Let the first taglachas of his tzaras, which is made to regrow his hair, and the taglachas that a nazir does after he becomes tamei, which also resets his naziris, which will also be now regrowing his hair. They should be compatible. Amalahem, they're not either compatible. Because ilu zelef nebias mine, the zelef nebias mine, if they were both before the tamei went to the mikveh, yafa atemaimer, I would agree that they're compatible. Ela tamei la'achar bias mine, the nazir that became tamei with tumas meis, first he gets his rika on shlishi u'shvi, then he goes to the mikveh, and then does he first get his haircut. While mitzayra lefnei bias mine, the pasuk when it says the order of operation, first the mitzayra cuts his hair, and then he goes to the mikveh. Amr Loi, so I told him, Yofa Marta, you're right. But the talaloi limei v'tamasai, let it work for the first taglachas of mitzayra should also work for Tumah. The Zelagadel was Zelagadel, who they're both to grow it again. Amr Lehen, Nazir Torah, who mitzayra, if it's a Nazir Torah, he's a mitzayra, Zelagadel was Zelahaver. The Nazir Tamei who mitzayra, well then Zelaf Nebi Yismaim, Zelacha B'Yismaim. So this is really repeating what we already said. But at the end of the day, any two taglachas that you try to combine, you will find they have slightly different properties, and therefore they cannot be combined. And that takes us to the end of this sugya. Now we'll just have a little bit of a repeat on Daf Samach Aleph Amar Aleph, which we will go to right now. Beautiful. So Zok Gemara, just to repeat, just do a little bit of a chazara. Tani Rab Chia, Zelef Nebius Emayim, Zelach Bias Mayim, Zelef Nezukas Damim, Zelach Zukas Damim, in each respective case, whatever the comparison is at that time. Now the Gemara comes up with another shot. Shetaglachas Hanega is the taglachas of a nega comes before the taglachas of mitzvah. So now we know comes before the taglachas of Nazir. So we know that there's 4 taglachios that we talked about. When this fellow was a Nazir, Suffolk Tomei, Suffolk Mitzayra, so remember we had 4 taglachas. The first taglachas was tzaras number 1. The second taglachas was tzaras number 2. The third taglachas was to reset the Nazir to Tuma. The fourth taglachas was to finish his Naziris to Tahira. So let's analyze these 4 taglachas. We already know that the taglachas of the Mitzayra has to be with a tar. It has to be with a razor. And if you remember, where did we learn it from? We learned from Zikna. Since the pasuk tells us by Mitzayra that you have to cut his beard, it must be that there's an issue to cut his beard. Since the only issue to cut his beard is with a tar, it must be that the only way you could be Mikayim with the chiyuv of taglachas for a Mitzayra is with a tar, is with a razor. We also know that a Nazir who successfully completes the term of his Naziris, he also has to cut his hair with a tar. We learned it from Kol Yemein Israel, tar le'yavol ha'roshoi, Aval, by his termination process, he does have to use a tar. But the Nazir Tuma, a Nazir became Tuma, and now he's resetting his Naziris, does he need a tar? So we already looked in the Masechta that we treat the Nazir of Tuma with a pasuk that tells us that the same taglachas that's done by a Nazir who's completing his Naziris successfully, that's the same type of taglachas required for a Nazir who became Tameh, who's resetting his Naziris. But Rabbi Bar Chama didn't know that. So Rabbi Bar Chama is focusing on this taglachas of Tumah. Must it be with a tar, or could it be through other methods? So let's have a look at the Shaila. Boy, Rabbi Bar Chama, how many arba taglachas? These 4 taglachas. And once again, the Rishonim tell us that we're really focusing on that one, the one of Tumah. The Ka'aman, that's required. Is a Mishum mitzvah? Is there a mitzvah on doing a Maisa taglachas? And then it would require that the Maisa be done in a specific way, requiring a tar, requiring a razor. Or maybe all we're trying to accomplish with that particular taglachas is just to get rid of the hair that was on him when he was tummy. But there's no Maisa taglachas. We're just looking for a clean-shaven person. L'maynaf kamina. What's the difference if there's a mitzvah of a Maisa taglachas, or if we're just looking for the results of a taglachas, if we're just looking for a clean-shaven person? The nafkamina is lavure benasha. Can you use a hair removal cream? A hair removal cream will actually lead to the same result, a clean-shaven person. If there's a mitzvah to do a Maisa taglachas, well then lavure benasha, you wouldn't be able to use a hair removal cream. If it's just to get rid of the hair, you just need a result. Well, then even if you smeared this hair removal cream, it should work as well. So what is the law? Rava said, Toshma umegaleach arba taglachios. Period. Our Mishnah says he gets 4 taglachios. Since it lumps them all into one bucket, we know that the Mishnah is telling us that all of these taglachios have to be identical, the same style taglachios. And that is the raya. And there are some svarim that end the parak right here. There are some svarim that add the following 3 lines, which actually says the raya is not from the mere fact that the Mishnah lumps them together. Rather, it's a more lom de sharai. And this is what the raya is. Isal kedaitach, mishum evuri sir, tuma, if you're just looking for the result, to get him clean shaven, afilu b'shalish namisa. You shouldn't require 4 taglachios, you should only need 3. And one of them could be with cream. Let's think about it. How could it be? Don't we say each taglachas that he's making is a suffix that it might be the final taglakas of a Nazir Tar. So if that's the case, every single one of these four, since we are mesophic, it might be the final taglakas of his Naziris, it has to be with a tar. So why is the Gemara saying that if the taglakas to reset a Nazir Tameh doesn't need a tar, then in our Mishnah you wouldn't need a tar for one of them. You would need it anyway, because regardless, it might be a taglakas that requires a tar. Zok tois is gewaltig. Zok tois is mamish gewaltig in Geschmack. What Toisva says is, let's think about this. This fellow, will he be able to drink wine after the third taglachas? Will he be able to be metamal mason after the third taglachas? No. Anyway, because of the suffix, he has to wait till the end of the 120 days, until the end of the fourth taglachas, to drink wine, to discharge his naziris. So if that's the case, the third taglachas, what is it? It's a suffix if it's either the final taglachas or if it's the taglachas to reset his tumah. Let him just use the hair removal cream. It's not going to discharge his naziris. Big deal. We're not letting him violate his naziris anyway for another 30 days. So from the fact that the Mishnah says you need 4 taglachios and not 3, it proves that even if this taglachos is to reset his naziris after he became tameh, it also requires a tar. Shema mina. So we have a beautiful raya that all 4 taglachios must be with a tar, with a razor. We were zoicha to finish the 8th parak of Nazir. Bilin Eder, Hadin Alach Shnei Nazirim, Hadin Alach Shnei Nazirim, Hadin Alach Shnei Nazirim. I just have one kasha for anybody who has an art scroll. Is it the word nasha, the hair cream word? Is that the hair removal cream? Is it nasha with a shin? Is it nasa? I just want to know how to pronounce it. If anybody has an art scroll or a Gemara that has the pronunciation. I see David has a Gemara with pronunciation, but you're muted.
There we go. Mine says NASA.
So Sid,
and
NASA.
It says NASA. Sorry,
Okay.
no, sorry, Nasha.
Nasha. Okay, so
Nasha, and it's a depilatory. Rubs it with a depilatory.
Yeah. Okay,
a rubbing cream.
Yeah. Okay, perfect. Thank you very, very much. So we're coming on to the last parak of Nazir. Be'ezras Hashem, we're going to finish Nazir on Thursday, and on Friday we're starting with Sechasaita. So I told my wife, you're hodoving before Pesach, and I'm hodoving before Pesach. The difference between you and me is, come Pesach, you're still going to be hodoving, and now I'm going to be on vacation learning Sechasaita, which is an easy Kishmaka Masechta. I was complaining to my wife that this preparation for Pesach is so stressful for me, because when I sit on the couch to relax, it's so painful because my wife is working so hard, and I can't fully enjoy my relaxation on the couch while my wife is working so hard. She said, maybe try helping. Okay, but everyone knows the famous story. It was Erev Pesach, and the husband tells the wife, I want to help you. What can I do for you? She says, you want to help me? Just get out of my hair, go to shul and learn. So the husband goes to shul and learn, and he comes back 3 hours later, and his wife says, where are you? He says, listen, I helped enough already. I can't help anymore. Okay, Zok the Heilige Gemara, the Heilige Mishnah, Hakusim, and the Mefarish tells us we're talking about Goyim, Hakusim Ein Lahem Naziris. The parish of Naziris, it does not apply to them. Now we know Goyim could make Nadarim and Nadavas, so maybe they could do Naziris as well. But the Mishnah says they cannot do Naziris; they're not included at all in that parish. Nosim bavadim, but women and avodim kanainim, yesh lam naziris. They actually could become nazir. But chaymer b'notzim b'avadim. There's a way in which the naziris of women is more chomer than the naziris of avodim. Why? Shehu kaifes avdod. If your eved was makabel naziris, you can force him to violate his naziris. Ve'enei kaifes ishta. But if your wife was makabel naziris, you cannot force her to violate. You could be mefer, which we'll see in the next Mishnah. But if you allow her to remain a nazir or a nazirah, you wouldn't be able to force her to violate her naziris. Zok the heilige Gemara. Katani, we learned in the Mishnah, Hakusim ein lahem naziris. Goyim don't have naziris. Where do we know that Goyim don't have naziris? Zog the Gemara the Tanu Rabbanim. Rebel, you're on mute, so I cannot hear you. You're on mute, Rebel. I cannot hear you. I see you're speaking, but I cannot. Oh, now I can hear you.
Yeah, but there's no kedusha by goyim.
Well, this is what the Gemara is now going to be discussing. That is what we're going to be learning about today. The kedusha of the goyim, the tumah of the goyim, and what level they have. So that's exactly the focus of the subject. The Tanu Rabbanim. It says Daber el Bnei Yisrael. So let's look at the pasuk that introduces the parasha of Naziris. The pasuk says as follows: Daber el Bnei Yisrael v'amarta alehem ish or isha kiyafli lindar neder Nazir lahazir lashem. Zok the Gemara. It says Daber el Bnei Yisrael. Well, Bnei Yisrael v'loy loy dikachava. So right away, when the Torah introduces the parsha of Naziris, the Torah makes it very clear. We're talking only to Bnei Yisrael. Yamarta aleim. It says Yamarta aleim. What is that referring to? The Rabbi says Avod. To tell us that the parsha of Naziris does apply to Avod. Frank the Gemara, why do I need a pasuk to tell me that the parsha of Naziris applies to Avod? I would have known it anyway. Lama likra. Why do I need a pasuk specifically to include avodim into the rules of Naziris? Ha'amrit, we said, kol mitzvah shah isha chayevis ba, evet chayev ba. And he said, isha isha. So when the fact that a woman could be makabel Naziris and she's included in the part of Naziris, I already know that avodim are included in Naziris. Amarava zakrava shiny hacha by Naziris is a special reason why I would think avodim would not be included. You know why? The Amakra lesser Isser al Nafsha. Now, lesser Isser al Nafsha is actually not a pasuk by Naziris. It's actually a pasuk by the parsha of regular Nadar. Like it says, Ishki Yider Neder Lashem, or Yishava Shvua Lesser Isser al Nafsha. But we know, Zok Toisvis, that there is a comparison between Naziris and Nadarim, and whatever applies to one applies to the other. So by Nadarim, the Torah tells us lesser Isser al Nafsha. B'misha nafsha knuyala. Who could make Nadarim? Somebody who owns his nefesh. Yota eved a knani to ein nafsha knuyala. An eved knani does not own his own nefesh. It actually belongs to his adai. So therefore, he's not included in the parsha of Nadarim. So therefore, I think it shouldn't be included in the parsha of Naziris either. V'hoyel v'ein nafsha knuyala. Ema gabi nazir nami loy. Maybe not only can he not make Nadarim, but he cannot make Naziris either. Avodim will be able to be Makabal Naziris. And that's the end of this brisa that shares with us Goyim are included, Goyim are not included in the Isser of Naziris or in the halachas of Naziris, while Avodim are. Now the Gemara drills down to understand this brisa a little bit better. Amar Mar, Daber el Bnei Yisrael v'loy lo'ev did'chav. Frank the Gemara, are you telling me whenever the Torah says Daber el Bnei Yisrael, that means that there's no way Goyim can have any connection to that parsha, even if there might be other words in the parsha that are inclusive, that might include Oivdei Kechavim? You're telling me, since it says Bnei Yisrael, no matter what other words or other ribuyim or other simanim or ramazim in the parsha that should tell us to include Goyim, Bnei Yisrael unequivocally excludes them. I'm going to show you, Dr. Gemara, by Erechin, it also says Bnei Yisrael, but due to some other words, we included Goyim in the parsha of Erechin, not to the same degree as a Yisrael is involved in Erechin, but they definitely do have a level of Erechin as well. And the Gemara goes on. V'gabe Erechin d'chsiv, daber el Bnei Yisrael. So the daber el Bnei Yisrael means not Goyim. Vitanya, we learned, in fact, that's true. Bnei Yisrael ma'arichin. So let's just make it very clear what these terms mean. Ma'arich is the one who says, my erech should be upon me, meaning I have to give a certain amount of money, or I can say your erech should be upon me, or I can say somebody else's erech should be upon me. So the ma'arich is the one who's accepting upon himself the chiyuv to pay. The ne'erach is the subject, the person whose value the ma'arich is donating. So it says as follows: B'nei Yisrael ma'arichin, only a yid can accept upon himself to give this money to the Beis Hamikdash. A guy cannot say erech of anybody alone. You might think that goyim can't even be the subject of an erechin, meaning if a Jew said, I want to give the erech of that goy, I want to give John's erech to the Beis Hamikdash, you might think that the Yid is not mechuyev to give anything because the subject, the nerach, is a goy. So you see, when it says ish in the parsha, even though it says b'nei Yisrael, to some degree it does include the involvement of a goy. So let's look at the pasuk by Erechin. It says, "Daber el b'nei Yisrael, v'amarta lehem ish kiyafli." So b'nei Yisrael excludes goyim, but ish they're not a complete write-off. The goyim have some shaykhus to Erechin, and they could be the subject of an Erechin. They could be the ne'erach. So zok to Gemara, in our case, it's exactly the same thing. It's exactly the same thing. Because look at our pasuk of Naziris. It says, Daber al b'nei Yisrael, v'amarta lehem ish oisha. So ish should include goyim. Well, we know goyim can't be fully included. Goyim can't be fully included in the halacha of Naziris because it says b'nei Yisrael. And just like by Erechin, they only have some level of involvement in Erechin. They can only be a nerach. We have to find some type of Naziris light that goyim could have. Zok Toishvis, very simple what the Gemara means. Yes, they could be makabel upon themselves Naziris, and they will be prohibited from drinking wine, and they will be prohibited from being Matamel Mason. But maybe all of the karbonis involved in Naziris, that the goyim can't do. So maybe Daber B'nai Yisrael says don't include goyim, they don't have full Naziris. But Ish, they do have Naziris, they just don't have the carbon portion of Naziris. That is the Gemara's kasha. So how do you know to totally exclude goyim from the world of Naziris? Zok Gemara, shiny hacha. Here we have more psukim in the parsha of Naziris that clearly show that a goy is totally excluded from the parsha of Nazir. The Amar Kra le'aviv ul'imoy lo yitama. The Nazir may not become tamei to a father or a mother, which means he has to have a father. Now, when we refer to someone as having a father, there's many halachas that a father has. But when we say generally a person doesn't have a father or he does have a father, we always are typically referring to Yerusha. And a goy does not yarshin his father. So since a goy doesn't yarshin his father, a goy is not included in the parsha of Oviv. He doesn't have a word. He doesn't have an Oviv, and therefore he could not be included in the parsha of Naziris. Right? Gemara, a goy doesn't yarshin his father. Lamai yilemel in Yerusha. In fact, the goy does yarshin his father. The Amar Rab Chia bar Abin Amar Rabbi Yochanan Ovid Kechavim Yoresh es Ovid. I tell him the right. Yerusha le'etzav nasati es hasei. So, Frank the Gemara, how could you tell me that a guy is excluded from the parsha of Naziris? Because the word la'ovid is not applicable to a guy. The word ovid is very applicable to a guy, because a guy, in fact, does yarshin his father. Dr. Gemara, you know what? Maybe what aspect of father are we referring to? A guy is not mechubed, is not musar. He doesn't have a mitzvah of kibbud avayim. So maybe in that respect, it's not his father. So when it says a guy doesn't have a father, the mitzvah of kibbud av, therefore he cannot be in the parsha of Naziris. So Dr. Gemara, that's not logical. Why in the world would you look at some obscure aspect of Oviv that's not the main focus of Oviv, such as Yerusha, and focus on Kibbud Av when the word Kibbud Av has nothing whatsoever to do with the parsha of Naziris? So why would you say that just because a guy doesn't have the mitzvah of Kibbud Av, so therefore it's not Oviv? Sure, it's Oviv. He actually is his father. So we have to abandon that.
I mean, kind of it does. He can be matame for his father. Is that what we said?
A Nazir cannot be matame to his father. It's very much his father.
Okay, so there's your connection. Nazir to
Well, that's
his father.
exactly the kasha. So how could you tell me that la'ava v'lima excludes a goy from being a nazir? He's very in the game. He has a father, so he has a father that we could tell him not to be metamatu. You want to say he doesn't have a father?
I don't
He
understand.
doesn't have a father.
Where do you say that a guy can be metama? A guy the chatama de kabriya.
Oh, so now you're going to discuss could a goy become tamei? That's exactly the next step of the Gemara. Look, the Gemara, okay, you're right. A goy has a father, and therefore the word la'avin in and of itself would not exclude a goy. But it says la'avin v'la'ima lo yitama. It means sheyesh l'tuma. The isder of Nazir is not to be metama. A goy doesn't have tuma. It means sheyesh l'tuma. Yotza. Let's turn over Thomas base. How could that you say that a guy is included in the parish of Nazir? He can't even become Tamid. So the Gemara settles that is the answer. How do I know that a guy can have no shaykhs to Naziris at all? Is because the prohibition for a guy to become Tamid is irrelevant. Because a guy doesn't become Tamid. Beautiful. Now the Gemara wants to know, how do you know a guy can't become Tamid? How do we know that a guy cannot become Tamid? The Omar Kra, the pasuk says, "The ish asher yitma." I'm going to just slide into the Torah here. The ish asher yitma v'lo yischata, v'nichrisa hanefesh ahu hahi mitoch hakol kes mikdash Hashem timeh menida lo yizarek alav tamid. Someone who is tamid tumas meis, he gets cursed. He's nichrisa mitoch hakol. A guy is not in the call. So you see the parish of Tumah is not relevant to a guy. Who has Tumah? Someone who has a call. Who said that this pasuk excludes a guy from Tumah? Maybe it just excludes a guy from getting cursed. That's the subject matter of the pasuk. He's nichras from the call. Only a yid will be nichras from the call, not a goy. But that doesn't mean a goy cannot become tamei. Mimai. Maybe the goy could become tamei. He just doesn't get chorus for coming into the Beis Hamikdash. B'tumah. Zok Gemara. I have another person. Amar Kra v'hiza hatahar ala tamei. So it's sort of a comparison from tahar to tamei. Now the pasuk of Vehiza Atar al Atame is actually the parsha that describes the kohen who is spritzing the water of the paraduma on the person who's the tamei mace. So the Torah person is spritzing the water of the paraduma on the tamei mace. So we're comparing a tar to a tamei, and we say kol sheyesh lo tahira. Anybody who can get tahira from the paraduma yesh lo tuma, such a person can become tamei. And anybody who's not able to get the effect, the tahira of the paraduma, ein lo tumah. How do you know that a goy cannot get the tahira of the paraduma? So if we look at the last of the first four lines in Tosfos, Tosfos says, "Ba'avid gechavim ein lo tahira." A goy is not included in the tahira process that he gets from the paraduma. Yichsiv in the parasha of Paraduma, v'hoisa la'adas b'nei Yisrael l'mishmeres l'menida chatasi l'mishmeres l'bnei Yisrael v'loy la'oiv dikachaf. A guy does not have tahira of the Paraduma, and therefore it says if he's a tahar latame, since he cannot become tahar, he cannot. Since he cannot become tahar, he cannot become tamei. So that's how we know a guy cannot become tamei. And since we know a guy cannot become tamei, we know that the pasuk in about Nazir that says la'avu is not relevant to the guy, and therefore a guy does not have any shaykhs to Nazirs. Dr. Gemara, that doesn't help us. This v'hiza hatara hatame will not help us. Why? The ema tahirahu delay havyalei hatuma havyalei. Maybe he doesn't have to hire, but he has tumah. Who said they're connected? So Tosfos asks, what do you mean who said they're connected? We're darshaning from the pasuk. Visa hatahar alatame, that they're linked to each other. So why is the Gemara ignoring that now? So Tosfos offers two terutzim. One teretz that Tosfos offers is if Vehiza Hatar ala Tomei was extra in any way, then I could use it for a drasha to tell you the only person who becomes Tomei is the person who could become Torah through the Paraduma. But those words aren't extra. We need those words to teach us another halacha that's discussed in Yuma, that you have to have kavanah to spritz on an adam, not on a behemoth. That is one pshat in Tosfos. But Tosfos has another fascinating pshat. If Vehiza Hatar, meaning Vehiza Hatar, the person who was tar because he used the paraduma ala tamei, that person can become tamei. A person who can get the tahir of the paraduma can become tamei. But if you look at the pasuk of Vehiza Hatar, it's not speaking about somebody who had the paraduma spritzed on him to be matarim. It's speaking about a guy who was always tar. A tar person who was never tamei is going to do the spritzing of the paraduma on the person who's tamei. That's one shot. But really, this is a very fascinating halacha in Hilchos Paraduma. You know, there's a saying, thou protestest too much. If the Torah says he's a tahor, vice the goys, he's not so tahor. The Torah has to call him tahor, because otherwise maybe he's not so tahor. And Chazal darshan from this pasuk of he's a tahor, that a tvul yoim is also kosher to spritz the ephor paraduma. Meaning, the tvul yoim is the last part of a higher process. So let's say he touched the sheretz and he's tamei for that day. He toivels in the mikveh, and his tumah still lingers until nightfall. So a tful yom is someone who toivel during the day and he's waiting for nightfall. You can have a tful yom of somebody who was tamei mace. On day 7, after he gets his last zrika, he toivels, and again he gets tful yom until the night. So a tful yom is someone who toiveled and he's just waiting for the night. From Vehiza Hatar, that Zal learned that even a tful yom is kosher to spritz the water, the paradum on someone. But the Tzedaikim said, no. Tahar means tahar. So the Chazal wanted to show the Tzedaikim, you're wrong. And because of that, as a policy, anyone who ever spritzed the paraduma, they bedafka made him touch a sheretz, they bedafka made him tamei, and then he went to the mikveh and then he spritzed. Just to show the Tzedaikim, you hold it's not good, we're going to do it bedafka. Because they did this major kula in paraduma, that they actually go out of their way to be metama de kohen, who is going to be spritzing this. Because of that, they put a whole whackload of chumras on paraduma. Paraduma is geferlich machmer. Like for instance, the people who work on the paraduma are born on a rock platform that's protected from tumah. And the mothers give birth on this rock. They do crazy things to be so careful about tumah. Why? Because they don't want anybody to think that the halachas of paraduma are lax. They're very chomer, but we have to bedafka use a full yoim only to undo the tzedakah. But whatever the case is, you no longer have a raya that unless you could become tar with the eva paraduma, you won't be able to become tamei. So once again, we need to know, how do you know that a goy cannot become tamei? Omar Kra, ve'ist asher yitma v'lo yischat. The pasuk says, ve'ist asher yitma v'lo yischat. Yitma is extra. It should just say ve'ist asher lo yischata. A person who doesn't cleanse himself. Obviously, he's tamei. Since it says yitma, it's a complete extra word. From there, we're going to learn that a goy cannot become tamei. So now that we know that a goy cannot become tamei, and one of the halachas of Naziris are la'avav u'le'imir lo yitama, that's how we know that a goy cannot become a Nazir. So that's method A. Method A was a goy cannot become tamei ben Nazir because a goy cannot become tamei at all. Now we're going to go back to the Havamina that the Gemara had before. The Gemara wanted to say that the reason why a goy is excluded to the Parsha of Nazir because a goy doesn't have a father. But the Gemara asked, what do you mean a goy doesn't have a father? A goy yarshins his father. So he has an ab. So the mere fact that it says la'aviv should not exclude a goy because a goy doesn't have a father. A goy does have a father because a goy yarshins his father. Zok to Gemara, a goy does not fully yarshin his father. There's one area of Yerusha that the Torah discusses openly and specifically, Lagabi a Yid, that does not apply to a Goy. So a Goy doesn't have the full Yerusha of his father, therefore La'ovid will exclude a Goy, just because he doesn't Yarshin his father completely. And where do you see that? Rabbi Achaba Yaakov Omar, Shiny Hachad Omar Kra, referring to an Evet Knaini, this Nachaltem Oisam Levnechem Acharech. You must give your avodim that you own as a Yerusha to your children. So you see, you have a full ownership in an Eved. You own his soul, you own his body, and therefore it's your nechasim, and therefore you are moirish to your children. Kol sheyesh le nachla yesh le tuma, v'chol she'ein le nachla ein le tuma. Since the goy does not yarshin an Eved Knaini from his father, therefore he's not an Av. If he doesn't have an Av, he doesn't have the full meaning of Av, because there's things that a Yid would yarshin, a goy wouldn't, therefore he's excluded from the halachas of Nazirs. Now, how do you know, and where do we know, and why there's a goy not yarshin his father's evodim? Because there was a limud in the parsha of avodim that it says, Atem koinin mehen, you could be koina, you could koina a goy and own the goy, v'loyhem koinin mikem, they cannot buy you and own a yid, and v'loyhem koinin zeseh, a goy who buys another goy as a slave does not own him. He has a right to his ma'aseh yadayim, he has a right to the production that this Eved does, but he doesn't own the actual Eved. Only a Yid actually owns an Eved Knaini, and therefore only a Yid could be Morish and Eved Knaini to his children, and therefore since a Goy is lacking in the full gamut of the Yerusha that the Torah discusses applies to a Yid, therefore when it says La'oviv L'ima Leitama, a Goy doesn't have Oviv to the full extent of the word. Therefore, the parsha of Naziris does not apply to him. So now we have two separate methods of how we know that a goy has no shaykh to the parsha of Naziris. Either because he can't be tomei, and therefore the other Yitama is not relevant, or because he doesn't have a father, because he doesn't fully yarshin his father. If the litmus test as to who is able to be a Nazir is if I could yarshin avodim, well, ihachi avodim namiloi. Guess what? We just learned from Alayim that avodim are included in Naziris, but an Eved doesn't yarshin an Eved. What does that mean? How did an Eved even get an Eved? Zok Toishvis, if someone gives a Eved Knaini, an Eved Almanas, to Ein L'Rabach Rishusbach, that Eved will actually be koin an Eved Knaini. So you have one Eved Knaini who actually owns another Eved Knaini. If that Eved Knaini dies, his children will not yarshin his Eved Knaini. No different than any other guy. And therefore, based on the logic that someone who doesn't have full Yerusha is not included in the parsha of Naziris, then why are avodim included? Yachi avodim namiloi. Ela Amarava, Zok Rava, we're going to have to abort this whole thing with the Av business, and we're going to go back to the drawing board. What was the original kasha? Why Goyim should be included at least in some level of Naziris? Because we had a raya from Erechim. By Erechim it said Al Bnei Yisrael, and then it said Ish, which means even though Bnei Yisrael excludes Goyim, Ish includes them, and therefore by Erechim they had some level of shaykhis to Erechim, meaning they could be Ne'erach, they could be the subject of an Erechim, although they can't be Ma'arich. And what was our kasha? Our kasha was that with Naziris as well, let's give them a Naziris light. It does say Bnei Yisrael to eliminate Goyim, but it says Ish. And what was the Naziris light that we were proposing? That the Goy could become a Nazir and be subject to all the restrictions of Nazir, but the Goy wouldn't bring Karbanos. Zog to Gemara, that's not a viable option. Let's have a look. Bishlamagava Erichin, you can have Erichin light. Never Bnei Yisrael Marichin, Vein Oiv the Chav Marichin, Yachal Lo Yunarachan, Tamalomer Ish. So therefore, it makes sense to have this Naziris, to have this Erichin light. It's a logical way of creating an Erichin light. Goyim can be the subject of Erichin, but they cannot be the ma'arich. They can't make there. But how do you want to apply that? How do you want to apply that to Nazir? Haka b'nei Yisrael nois v'numavin carbon. V'hein oivdik gachavim nois v'numavin carbon. Is that what you want to say? You want to say that why is it a Nazir light? Because a Yisrael could make Naziris and he brings all the karbanis, and the goyim are not included. Yachal af loyu Nazir and klal. You might think you're not Nazirim at all. Hamadomer ish, and you want to say that ish tells you that they could be a Nazir, but they don't make a carbon. Zok the Gemara, you cannot say that the pasuk of ish and Bnei Yisrael, that combination, is teaching you that a goy cannot bring a carbon. You know why? Because I already know from a different pasuk that a goy cannot bring any karbanos related to Naziris. Zok the Gemara, Amri imishum carbon. If you want to say that what our pasuk by Nazir with ish and Bnei Yisrael are telling you is that the goy could become a Nazir, just not bring a carbon, lav mehachanafkalei. We don't learn it from the pasuk of ish. Elamei hasa. There's a pasuk that talks about goyim could bring karbanis, and the pasuk says, I don't have the pasuk here, but the pasuk that discusses the halacha of a goy bringing karbanis, the pasuk where we learn that a goy is allowed to bring nedarim and nedavis to the Beis Hamikdash, the last word of the pasuk says la'oila, and we darshan la'oila prat lenaziris. The carbon that a goy cannot bring is a carbon of naziris, divrei Rabbi Yosy Haglili. So, Frag the Gemara, how could you tell me that from the combination of Bnei Israel and Ish, you learn that a guy doesn't bring Karbanis Nazir? We already know that from La'oila. So, therefore, we have to ignore the word Ish and use it for something else, and we have to say that Bnei Israel totally excludes Goyim from Naziris. So, by Erichin, where you asked from, there you could blend it. You could work with Bnei Israel and Ish and create this quasi Erichin applicability to a goy, but by Nazir there's no way to do it, because if you want to say it's the carbon you know from La'ila. So therefore we're forced to say that Bnei Yisrael completely excludes goyim from Naziris. So Frek Taitzvis, now that you're learning that Bnei Yisrael totally excludes goyim from Naziris, then why do I need a pasuk of La'ila to tell me that a goy doesn't bring a carbon Naziris? If a goy can't be a Nazir, naturally, he can't bring a carbon of Naziris. Zok Toys is a Gabalti Chiddush. A guy can't even pay for the carbonis of a Yid who became a Nazir. Let's say a guy has a buddy, a Yid who's a Nazir. The guy can't say, I'm going to pay for your carbonis. The Yid has to pay for his own carbonis, or a Yid can pay for somebody else, for another Yid's carbonis. The guy cannot pay for a Yid's carbonis. Zok the Gemara. So now the Gemara came to another raya as to how we know that goyim are not included in Naziris, because it says Bnei Yisrael, and you can't learn from Ish that they're included in Naziris in a way like just not for Karbanis, because the Oila tells us that. For the Gemara, okay, you cannot say goyim have Naziris light, that they don't bring Karbanis, but maybe they can have a different type of Naziris light. Ema, let's suggest Bnei Yisrael noise in Naziris Oila, maybe all of the different types of Naziris available apply only to a Yisrael, but to a guy, the option to be a Nazir forever, that does not apply to a guy. So you have a beautiful drasha. Bnei Yisrael excludes a guy. From what? From Naziris Olam. Ish includes a guy for all other type of Naziris. So once again, you have a Naziris light. If you have a Naziris light, let's say a guy has a shaykhis to Naziris. Zok to Gemara, and Yachal Nazir, Tamarish. Amar Yochanan. It doesn't make sense that that's what the pasuk means when it says Dabar al Bnei Yisrael Ish. You know why? Miksiv Nazir Olam. The pasuk doesn't say anything about Nazir Olam. You're making up. You're pulling out of a hat of Nazir Olam. That should be the difference. The pasuk there does talk about Kabbalah. That would have been a viable explanation if it wasn't for La'olam. But to say we're trying to make a distinction about Nazir Olam, you don't see that anywhere in the pasuk. It's not logical to say that that's what the pasuk means. Okay, So the Gemara had some other suggestions of how you can have a lighter version of Naziris that would apply to a goy. Ema b'nei Yisrael madirin b'neiim b'nazir, ve'ein avdei gacham madirin b'neiim b'nazir. Maybe for b'nei Yisrael you learn that although a yid could make his son into a nazir, a goy cannot make his son into a nazir. Yachol on you nazirim, you would think a goy can't be a nazir at all. Ish. So once again, we have a way to learn that the goy has a level of nazirish, just not the same level as a yid, because a goy could not make his son into a nazir. Zakt Gemara, that's not logical at all to say, because Amar Rabbi Yochanan halacha ibn nazir. Do you know how we know that a person can make his son into a nazir? It's halacha l'moshe Sinai. So the halacha l'moshe Sinai was only said by a yid and not by a goy. So why would I say on the halacha l'moshe Sinai that the pasuk is telling me that a halacha l'moshe Sinai doesn't apply to a goy, and you know it from Ish? It's not the norm. It's unheard of, to bring a pasuk to clarify halacha l'moshe Sinai. Halacha l'moshe Sinai are clear and complete. We don't need psukim to explain the halacha l'moshe Sinai. So that's not an option. So let's try another variation of Nazir light that might apply to a goy. Ema b'nei Yisrael megalchen al Nazir Savian. We know that b'nei Yisrael, let's say their father dies and he was the Nazir, he completed his Naziris, they could bring the karbanos that the father left on behalf of their father. But megalchen al Nazir Savian. A goy can't. So once again, you have Naziris light. There are certain laws of Naziris that don't apply to a goy. So why can't you say Al B'nai Yisrael excludes a goy from those special types of Naziris, but not from Naziris as a whole? And for the Gemara, turning it back onto Samach Beis Amud Aleph, and for the Gemara, and then we'll stop. Yachol lo Nazir Tamlamer Ish Zaktamar again now Itmar Amar Rabbi Yochanan Alachi ben Nazir. How do you know that a Yisrael is allowed to bring the karbanis on behalf of his father? That's also halacha l'moshe Sinai. And any halacha l'moshe Sinai, we don't learn its principles and its properties from a drush and a pasuk. So just to do an inventory, how do we know halacha l'moshe in our Gemara that a goy has no part of Naziris? The first shot was because the goy cannot become tameh, so the words does not make sense for a goy. That was one shot. And the other shot that we had, because we slugged up everything else, the other shot that we had is that there's no way to darshan this quasi-Naziris. You can't say that the goy could be a Nazir, but it can't be a carbon, because that I know from the pasuk of La'ila. You can't say it's to tell you that a father can't be mother his son. That's halacha l'moshe Sinai. You can't say that a son can't bring the karbanos for his father. That's also halacha l'moshe Sinai. So therefore, since there is no way to learn any type of quasi-Naziris to apply to a goy, we're forced to say Al B'nai Yisrael unequivocally says a goy can't be a Nazir, and what we learn from Ish, we'll have to figure that out. But clearly the pasuk is telling us, unlike Erechin, where a goy has some level of shaykhis to Erechin, by Naziris, a goy has no connection to Naziris at all. Now with that, we will stop here, and Be'ez Hashem, we will continue tomorrow. Shkoyach.
Mazel tov again.
Thank you.